The chandeliers glittered above the grand ballroom, casting their golden light over a sea of polished marble and polished lives. Every corner of the gala seemed to hum with laughter, clinking glasses, and whispered deals. The air smelled of perfume, wealth, and the kind of arrogance that only comes when the richest of the rich gather to admire themselves. But beneath the glamour, tension ran like an invisible thread, pulling certain fates together in ways no one expected. Elena stood in the center of it all, her emerald dress flowing over her growing belly, her presence both celebrated and scrutinized. Some guests whispered about her elegance, others about her pregnancy, but most whispered about her husband, Victor. He was the millionaire everyone knew, not for his charm, but for his pride. He made money the way storms made destruction, leaving people in awe but never at peace. He thrived on control, on being the loudest voice in the room, on ensuring no one, not even his wife, dared steal the spotlight from him. Elena had grown used to the weight of eyes on her, used to plastering a smile that masked exhaustion and quiet sorrow. She had perfected the art of standing still while the world spun around her, appearing flawless even when her heart felt like a cracked vase barely holding together. But tonight something was different. Something pulled at her like a whisper from the past threading through the glamorous crowd. Her eyes scanned the room, and then she saw him, Adrian Cole, her breath caught, her chest tightening as though the world had folded in on itself. The host of the gala, the elusive billionaire who rarely appeared in public, stood across the room with an aura that seemed to command gravity itself. His sharp suit was tailored like a second skin, his dark gaze cutting through the glitter and chatter until it landed squarely on her. The years had carved strength into his features, but the eyes were the same, the eyes she once fell into, the eyes that once promised her forever before vanishing like smoke. The past slammed into her with merciless force. She remembered late nights in a cramped apartment where dreams were bigger than their pockets. She remembered laughter over cheap dinners, kisses under flickering streetlights, and the way Adrian swore he'd conquer the world for her. And then she remembered the silence, the unanswered calls, the letter that never came, the hollow ache of a love abandoned without explanation. Now here he was, no longer the young man chasing dreams, but the billionaire hosting a gala dripping with power. And she, once his muse, now stood at another man's side, carrying his child, wearing a smile that felt more like armor. Victor's hand suddenly tightened around hers, snapping her back to the present. His eyes narrowed, following her gaze across the room. He didn't miss much, and he certainly didn't miss this, the flicker of recognition, the tremor in her breath, the ghost rising between them. His lips curled into the kind of smile that masked fury with charm, a skill he had perfected over years of business and dominance. "Who is he?" Victor's whisper slithered, low and sharp, barely audible beneath the orchestra's swell. Elena forced herself to breathe evenly, to shake her head, to dismiss the question with the practiced ease of a woman who had learned the cost of honesty in her marriage. "No one," she murmured, her voice steady, though her pulse thundered. But Victor wasn't satisfied. His pride, already fragile in a room where Adrian Cole's presence overshadowed every millionaire and mogul, began to crack. The idea that his wife, his possession, could look at another man with even a flicker of history ignited a rage that simmered beneath his skin. His jaw clenched, his grip on her hand turned to iron, and Elena felt the storm gathering. Around them, the gala continued in ignorance. Guests laughed, sipping champagne, unaware of the quiet war brewing in the middle of the marble floor. The orchestra played on, the violins swelling as though they could disguise the truth unraveling between husband and wife. Yet for Elena, the world felt suspended. Every sound muted except for the pounding of her heart and the weight of Adrian's stare. Adrian didn't move, but his eyes spoke volumes. He knew, he remembered. And though his expression was carefully unreadable, Elena could see it, the flicker of regret, the silent recognition of everything they had been and everything they had lost. She wanted to look away, to escape the past, clawing its way into her present, but she couldn't. Victor's fingers dug deeper into her skin. "Don't forget who you belong to," he muttered, his voice venom disguised beneath a smile for the watching guests. Elena swallowed hard, her throat burning. She had learned long ago not to provoke him in public, to keep the peace at any cost, but something inside her cracked tonight. Maybe it was the weight of Adrian's presence. Maybe it was the child growing within her. Or maybe it was the simple truth that her soul had grown weary of chains disguised as vows. She forced herself to break the gaze, to look away from Adrian, and back into the glittering facade of the Gala. But the damage was already done. The air was different now, charged with invisible electricity, pulling them all toward a moment none of them were prepared for. Adrian turned, addressing another guest with effortless charm, but his eyes lingered on Elena long enough to leave her trembling. He was waiting, watching, and she knew that whatever had begun the moment their eyes met wasn't finished. It was only the beginning of a storm that would shatter every illusion the night tried to hold. Victor leaned in, his lips brushing her ear, his words a blade cloaked in silk. "Smile, we're being watched." Elena obeyed, curving her lips into a perfect smile that fooled everyone except Adrian, whose gaze had already stripped her soul bare. The gala glittered on, but beneath the chandeliers, beneath the champagne and laughter, a hidden fire burned. 3 lives, bound by love, betrayal, and pride, were colliding once more. And as Elena stood in the crossfire of her past and present, she knew one thing with absolute certainty: the night would not end the way it began. The music swelled, violins weaving through the air like threads of silk, but Elena felt none of it. The crowd blurred into faceless shapes, laughter and chatter collapsing into a dull roar against the pounding in her ears. Victor's grip on her wrist was still tight, his smile still plastered for the world to see, but behind the performance his fury simmered. He wasn't a man accustomed to being overshadowed, and the presence of Adrian Cole had shifted the balance of the entire room. Every guest seemed to orbit him, every conversation drifting back to the enigmatic host who had returned to the public eye after years of silence. Elena's heart twisted with a storm of emotions she couldn't name. There was anger at herself for feeling the tremor of old love resurface, anger at Adrian for appearing now, when her life had been reduced to survival, anger at Victor for the chains he called marriage. But beneath it all, buried deep where no one could see, was longing. A longing so sharp it felt like a wound, a whisper of what life might have been if the man across the room hadn't disappeared without explanation. Victor leaned close again, his voice cutting through her thoughts. "Stay close to me tonight, no wandering eyes, no wandering words." His warning was quiet, disguised with the warmth of a husband's tone, but Elena knew better. She nodded silently, her lips still curved into a practiced smile, but her soul recoiled. The evening pressed on, each moment heavier than the last. Elena walked beside Victor, greeting guests, laughing at jokes she barely heard, accepting compliments on her beauty and grace while her mind remained tethered to Adrian's presence. Every so often she felt his gaze brush against her like a phantom touch, reminding her that he was watching. And when she dared to glance his way, his expression remained unreadable, a mask carved from steel. But she knew him once deeply, intimately, and that knowledge whispered to her that behind the mask, something stirred. It happened during the toasts. Crystal glasses raised high, voices echoing praise for the host's generosity, the grandeur of the evening, and the brilliance of the man behind it all. Adrian stood at the center, commanding attention without effort. His words were measured, his presence steady, but Elena caught the fleeting pause, the way his eyes swept the crowd and lingered for a heartbeat too long on her. The connection was undeniable, electric, and though no one else noticed, Victor did. His hand tightened. Again, harder this time, the edge of pain digging into her skin. "I see it," he muttered, his jaw clenched as though restraining the storm inside him. "Don't think for a second you can hide it from me." Elena's chest tightened, panic fluttering beneath her ribs, but she remained silent, arguing. In this room with so many eyes would be a mistake. After the toast, the crowd dispersed into smaller clusters, laughter rising again as music shifted to a livelier tune. Victor pulled Elena aside, steering her toward a quieter corner near the marble pillars. His smile never wavered for the passing guests, but once they were momentarily alone, his mask slipped. His voice dropped low, dangerous. Whatever history you have with that man ends tonight. Do you understand me? Elena met his eyes, her own steady but burning. I understand you want control over everything, Victor. But you can't erase the past. The words escaped before she could stop them, bold and sharp, and the second they left her lips, she saw the flicker of rage ignite in his eyes. His hand moved so fast she almost didn't register it, fingers raised, the weight of violence building in the air. But before it could fall, a voice interrupted. Victor! The sound of Adrian's voice sliced through the moment like steel. Both turned, and there he stood, composed, confident, his gaze fixed firmly on Victor, though his presence enveloped them both. I don't believe we've been formally introduced, Adrian said, extending a hand, his tone calm but charged. Adrian Cole. Victor straightened, his fury pressed back under the surface, replaced with that businessman's charm he wielded like a weapon. He clasped Adrian's hand, his smile wide, his voice smooth. Victor Stone, and this is my wife, Elena. The word wife landed heavy in the air, deliberate, like a stake driven into the ground. Adrian's eyes flickered, just barely, but enough for Elena to see. He held Victor's gaze a beat too long before finally turning to her, his expression softening by a fraction. Elena, he said, his voice low, reverent. As if her name was a secret he hadn't spoken in years, her throat tightened, her lips parting in the faintest whisper. Adrian. The name slipped out, trembling, heavy with memories. Victor noticed. He noticed everything. His arm coiled around her waist, possessive, a silent declaration to both her and Adrian. We should get back to the crowd, he said, his smile never faltering. But Adrian didn't move, and in that stillness a silent war began. The rest of the night unfolded like a game of chess. Every glance, every word, every subtle movement carried weight. Adrian mingled with guests, his laughter echoing across the room, yet his gaze found Elena again and again. Victor stayed glued to her side, his grip firm, his smile sharp, determined to remind everyone and himself that she belonged to him. Elena moved like a shadow between them, her soul pulled in two directions. Each time Adrian's eyes caught hers, she felt the pull of who she once was, of love that had never died, buried but never extinguished. Each time Victor's hand tightened or his words brushed her ear like a blade, she felt the chains of her present tighten. The room glittered with wealth and beauty, but for Elena, it became a cage of gold. As the night deepened, the tension grew unbearable. The music thundered, the guests danced, but beneath it all, the storm raged. Victor's pride, Adrian's regret, and Elena's longing collided in every glance, every silence. Something was building, inevitable, unstoppable. Then it came. The breaking point. Victor, fueled by too much wine and too much envy, pulled Elena to the center of the floor. Dance with me, he demanded, his voice smooth but his grip harsh. She obeyed, the crowd parting as they moved under the chandeliers. His steps were forceful, controlling, dragging her across the marble as if she were a possession to display. Elena lifted her eyes, and across the room Adrian stood watching. Their gazes locked, the world narrowing until nothing else existed. And in that instant Victor saw it, the undeniable thread that bound them still. Rage erupted, unchecked this time, and before Elena could react, his hand struck across her face. Gasps erupted around the ballroom, the orchestra faltering into silence. The world froze, chandeliers glittering above as the room recoiled in shock. Elena staggered, her hand instinctively rising to her cheek, her eyes burning with humiliation and pain, and Adrian moved. The moment Victor's hand collided with Elena's face, time fractured. The ballroom, once alive with music and laughter, collapsed into a stunned silence. Crystal glasses trembled in unsteady hands, whispers snapped through the air like sparks. And all eyes bore down on the center of the floor. The beautiful illusion of wealth and civility shattered in an instant, replaced with raw shock at a man's violence laid bare under chandeliers. Elena stood frozen, her cheek burning, her heart racing so fast she thought she might collapse. Shame flooded her, not because of what she had done, but because of how completely exposed she felt. Every guest, every camera phone discreetly raised, every judgmental eye, it all pressed against her like a crushing weight. But before she could even take a breath, Adrian surged forward. He didn't move like a man uncertain of his place. He cut through the crowd with the certainty of someone reclaiming what was his to protect. In 3 long strides he was beside her, his hand steadying her trembling shoulder, his eyes locked on Victor with a fury so controlled it was almost terrifying. "Enough," Adrian said, his voice low but carrying across the room with the authority of command. Victor sneered, masking his sudden unease with bravado. "This is between a husband and his wife. You don't get to interfere?" His voice cracked slightly, a fracture in his composure, but Adrian didn't flinch. He turned, not to Victor, but to the crowd, every socialite, investor, journalist, and politician present, and spoke with the calm of a man who knew the world was watching. "A husband who strikes his wife in front of witnesses does not deserve the title. This is not private, this is violence." The room shifted. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, eyes widening as truth settled like a heavy stone. The veil of respectability that Victor had built around himself was dissolving in real time, and no amount of charm could salvage it now. Cameras clicked, phones recorded, reputations recalibrated. Victor's empire wasn't just cracking, it was collapsing. Elena's breath came in shallow waves. But in Adrian's presence she found something steady. For years she had carried her pain in silence, hidden behind smiles and elegant gowns, but in this moment her silence no longer served her. Slowly, she stepped away from Victor's grip and into her own strength. "You don't own me, Victor," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "You never did." The words seemed to hang in the air, shimmering like glass just before it shatters. The crowd leaned in, waiting for Victor's reaction, but his power was slipping. His jaw clenched, his hands shook, and for the first time, Elena saw fear in him, not fear of her, but fear of the truth that could no longer be hidden. Adrian placed himself between them, his presence a shield, but it wasn't about him anymore. This was Elena's moment. She lifted her chin, her eyes sweeping the room, refusing to shrink beneath their stares. "For too long, I've played the role of the perfect wife while enduring his cruelty behind closed doors. Tonight, the world sees him for who he truly is." Gasps erupted again, but this time they weren't for the slap. They were for her courage, her refusal to remain silent. The tide had turned. Victor's wealth, his influence, his carefully curated image, all of it unraveled beneath Elena's words. Victor lunged forward, desperation flashing in his eyes, but Adrian stopped him with a firm hand pressed to his chest. Their eyes locked. 2 titans facing off, but this time Adrian didn't need to fight with fists. The truth had already struck the deepest blow. "It's over, Victor," Adrian said, his tone steady and unyielding. "You've destroyed yourself." Security, uncertain but emboldened by the murmurs of the crowd, moved in. They hesitated only briefly before flanking Victor, guiding him away despite his protests, his threats echoing into emptiness. His empire of intimidation had crumbled the moment his mask slipped, and now, stripped of his power, he was nothing more than a man exposed. Elena watched him go, her body trembling, her cheeks still stinging, but something inside her shifted. The weight she had carried for years lifted, piece by piece, leaving her lighter, freer. The silence in the ballroom slowly gave way to scattered applause, not for the spectacle, but for her. People weren't cheering scandal. They were honoring strength. Adrian turned to her, his eyes softening in a way that nearly undid her. "Elena," he whispered, as if her name was a prayer he had carried for years. But she shook her head, tears glistening as she steadied herself. "This isn't about us," she said quietly, though her voice carried with quiet authority. "This is about me finally choosing myself." Adrian's gaze held hers, understanding flooding his features. He nodded once, solemnly, as though he had waited for this moment all along, not to rescue her, but to witness her reclaim her life. The night ended not with music, but with transformation. Guests filtered out, whispering of what they had seen, knowing they had witnessed the undoing of a man and the rise of a woman who refused to be silenced. The media would devour the story, but Elena no longer feared it. For the first time in years, she walked without chains, her steps steady, her spirit unbroken. Later, when the ballroom stood empty and the chandeliers dimmed, Elena lingered by herself. Her reflection stared back from the mirrored walls, a woman. No longer hidden, no longer controlled. Her cheek still bore the faint redness of Victor's hand, but it was no longer a mark of shame. It was the final scar of a battle she had endured, and one. Adrian approached. His footsteps quiet, but Elena turned before he spoke. She managed a small, weary smile. "You don't need to save me anymore," she said. He returned her smile, bittersweet. "I never wanted to save you, Elena. I only ever wanted to love you. But now you've saved yourself." For a moment, silence stretched between them, filled with years of what-ifs and unspoken words. And though part of her longed to step into his arms, Elena knew this night was not about rekindling lost love. It was about forging her own path. She walked toward the doors, her gown trailing like a banner behind her, each step echoing with freedom. The world outside awaited uncertain, judgmental, perhaps cruel, but she no longer feared it. She was no longer the woman who endured in silence. She was the woman who had found her voice. As the doors closed behind her, Adrian remained in the ballroom, watching with quiet reverence. He knew she belonged not to him, not to Victor, but to herself. And that, more than anything, was the ending she deserved. The gala would be remembered not for its grandeur, nor its host, but for the night a woman broke free under glittering chandeliers, when truth shattered power and silence gave way to courage. And in that moment, Elena was no longer just a victim of circumstance. She was a survivor, a force, a woman who refused to be defined by anyone but herself.